because as we've been preaching along, we did start with, or I guess in the middle of, got a forum on Matthew, so we were talking about the way the lectionary goes. And I thought I'd let you know also, in case you were wondering what these readings have to do with each other, they have nothing to do with each other. In the Old Testament, at this time of year, we are reading the salvation history. And the last 2 weeks, I think, people have concentrated on that salvation history. In the New Testament, we're doing, in the Gospel, we're doing Jesus' teachings. And it's mostly from the book of Matthew, I think pretty much all for a few months. And in the epistle, we're reading some epistles in course. So we've had a few chapters from Romans. I chose Romans this week, partly because I love this first line. I do not understand my own actions. To me, that's my life. I mean, there's some things I know why I do what I do, but mostly, in retrospect even, I keep rehashing things from my childhood and wonder why I did what I did, or didn't do what I didn't do. And this is what, in this section, what Paul is talking about, that we seem to be able to know what's right, but not do what's right. And so I said, this is like my 12-step sermon, right? For those of you who are familiar with 12-step programs, for one way or another, I actually think we maybe all should be in one. I'm brownies and potato chips. But the point of a lot of what happens in the 12 steps is saying, I'm not in control anymore. And so trying to control is not the way that I'm going to stop eating brownies. Being in control is not the way that we get everything right. And yet, isn't that pretty much what all of the news is about? How come you didn't look at that study? How come you did it that way? Why weren't you in control of that step? Why? And everybody, and then we have a Senate hearing and a House hearing and another Senate hearing and another House hearing. And we go around and we blame everybody. And it's all about who was in control and who knew what when and all of that. I think that Paul is talking about something that's very profound, and possibly the language he's using maybe we wouldn't use, because we have a different way of talking about our bodies and our minds and our imaginations and such. What I want us to think about today is what we are part of, not what we are apart from, but what we belong to. Now, I love watching the science channels, and there's been the series Cosmos on, the redo of Cosmos, and some fabulous programs there. But if you think about it, our entire universe, as far as we've been able to see or experience in some way or another, is right now being formed and being destroyed. There are planets being birthed and planets being sucked back into black holes. There are suns bursting and there are suns dying. And our own planet, we know now, and almost in my lifetime, we are learning about plate tectonics, right? The whole Earth is in motion. And some mountains are being formed, and with subduction, some trenches are being formed. And we have earthquakes. And the Earth goes around, and because the Earth keeps going around, we have weather. And so our lemonade stand gets rained out. It rains from 2 to 7 p.m. So, I can't control the weather. I actually said on the radio that we should pray for good weather. I should not have said that. It was a bad idea. No, I don't control the weather with my prayers, nor will I ever control weather with my prayers. Not even everybody praying together. Nor will any particular movement or sacrifice or anything else control the weather or earthquakes. Or think about the other part. We are all living things. And yet we all act as if being healthy and well all the time is what is to be expected. And, there's quite a few people here that know that unhealth and unwellness is actually kind of more common than we'd like to think about, and really is devastating. in many circumstances. And yet, a lot of what happens in our bodies is the way we were made, folks. We were made in an earth that has bacteria and viruses. We were made in a body that breaks down over time. We're all getting old right now. I've got this pain in my neck here and my itch over there. Oh, you know, we're all getting a little older. I think that we think that the point of creation is some kind of perfection. And it's the kind of perfection that we imagine. And I may not imagine it exactly the way you imagine it. I don't want it to be 80 degrees every day. Although I bet there's people in the room that would love 80 degrees every day. I'd like 70, and, you know, oh, I just forgot, there's a musical that has and it'll rain from 2 to 3, you know, and all of that. Carolyn, thank you. It just went out of my head. And, you know, and that to me is, and the flowers will grow. And yet, when I have visited a desert where nothing is growing, or like we were in White Sands one time and literally nothing grows there. It's an amazing landscape. So what's perfection? It's not what my idea is, it's what God has created. And as we look at, you know, what has God created in us is one other thing that we share in common with the rest of humanity, and possibly a couple other species, is a brain that has transcendent thinking. So we can do science, and we can do art, and we can do religion, because we see sort of a bigger picture. We kind of can study what's around us. We can wonder about why. We can create things with our own hands and so on. And it's this transcendent sort of brain that also gets us in trouble. Now, I have a feeling that if we were talking about it today, it wouldn't be our flesh we were talking about the way Paul does, but maybe, you know, your imagination is getting you in trouble. Or your lack of imagination is getting you in trouble. That a lot of the problems come from the way that we feel about things, or think about things and all that. And I'm not talking about being able to control your thoughts either, because we can't control those either. Actually, I'm preparing this sermon, and then Mylan Reed is doing some psychiatric thing online. And there's a psychiatric disease, I love this, where people begin to think one of their hands is not under their control, and that they can't control it and will do things that they don't want it to do. Alien hand syndrome.
That's what it's called?
Alien hand syndrome. Well, I'm thinking, you know, we all have a little bit of alien hand syndrome, don't we? Of one kind or another. So what is Paul asking us to do? I think part of it is the way that we approach the world we live in. If our understanding is that Jesus has bridged the gap between what our imaginations can figure out and what God has created, then relapsing into God might be accepting the world the way it is, in a sense. But again, what's the world the way it is? We have our imaginations, we have science, we have history, we have theology, we have all of those things. That's part of the way the world is. And we relapse into the reality of what's possible. And not fight it, but use it. But there's another piece of this, and I know I've said this in sermons probably for 25 years, but, well, my shoes, where were my shoes made? And I always use shoes as an example because they kind of tend to be from all different kinds of places. I may do wonderful things myself throughout the day, but then I go and buy a pair of shoes that's made by somebody who's not being treated right. So it's even more complicated than just kind of being aware of what's going on. So when it comes down to it, I think Paul is saying, you can't win this game. You can't be perfect. You can't completely control everything in the world. We try all the time, and it doesn't mean that we aren't using our creativity to make things better, to make children better, to make our elderly more comfortable. We do all of that. But we don't say we failed when things just go the way of nature. We don't say we failed when we bury somebody. We say they had a life. We don't say we failed when a tree is felled and it rots. It's part of what is created. And finally, we have to celebrate God's creation. And we have to thank God for giving us these minds, these imaginations, these hearts that push us to try new things, that push us to create, and also drive other people crazy. I think that the two responses to what Paul is saying in Romans is to say, I am sorry, God, that I didn't do what you wanted me to do. Not what I wanted to do. I'm sorry, God, that I didn't do what you wanted me to do. Let me settle down and I'll try and listen better. I'll try and let my left hand pay more attention this time. Let my whole body do what you want me to do. And it's not an easy process. And I think that the place that we do this is in confession and prayers. Quietly giving ourselves over to God, which is what Paul is saying. Give yourself over to God. And always be listening to that quiet voice within that's saying, maybe that's not the pair of shoes you want to buy. Maybe you want to buy that pair of shoes. Or maybe you want to go to this community meeting about iron mining. Or maybe you want to, whatever it is. And all of that is important in our lives. I do not understand my own actions. And who will rescue me from this body of death? And then Paul just answers, thanks be to God, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.